Jimmy John's is being sued by a pair of former employees for engaging in what they consider is systemic wage theft. Here we go. Now, these two workers who worked at different locations in Illinois for Jimmy John's accused the company of setting policies that caused a failure to pay for all hours worked, minimum wages, and overtime wages. Now, simply put, workers say that these corporate policies force workers to put in more hours off the clock, and then the company will refuse to reimburse them for those extra hours. Now, they also claim that they enforced that whole thing through the use of a computer monitoring system and mandatory nightly reports from individual store owners that get directly sent over to corporate headquarters. Now, this lawsuit names both the franchise owner and corporate headquarters as well in the suit. Already, what do you guys think?
Well, first of all, as a non-American, I can just say that Jimmy John's is an awful name for a apparently gourmet sandwich restaurant. It just sounds awful. But in terms of kind of not being paid for doing over and above the kind of number of hours you're contracted to do, like I've had a number of jobs where, you know, you're only supposed to do so many hours, but you end up working almost 24/7 in some places, and you do work above and beyond what you're requested to do, and you don't get paid any extra for that, and that's part of the contract, and you understand that. But that's working at places like kind of summer schools and stuff like this. For what is kind of a 9-to-5 kind of restaurant-based job, you can't have that sort of business model. It's just, I don't want to say it's morally wrong, it's just, you know, corporations are amoral, they don't care, they're trying to make as much money as possible. But the fact they've got that this restaurant chain has gone to such great lengths, it seems, to try and stop giving as much money to their employees as they can, I feel like this lawsuit is warranted, and so I hope that kind of the workers do get the money that they deserve for working the extra hours and the overtime.
See, I agree. I agree with Stephen. I'm going to bring a personal anecdote. I worked for an organization, and they'd set out clearly that we don't do overtime hours. If you wind up staying for overtime, please understand that at this point it is you are volunteering for the company. We're not going to task you over hours. If we do that, then you will get paid. But if you stay over time, we're not going to pay you overtime. So be aware of that. If these organizations had said that at the start and said, look, we don't want to pay overtime. If we task you with overtime work, then you will be paid, obviously. But if you're going to stay of your own volition, then we're not going to pay you overtime. I would be more accepting of that. I'd still be iffy, but it would make sense. You can't have workers staying overtime for time and a half pay just because they want time and a half pay when you're a company trying to make money. That it's, for one thing, it incentivizes overwork and it burns people out, and the other thing, it would probably lose you money eventually. But that's not the case here. They weren't telling people that they weren't going to pay them overtime, and they're not paying some of them for even their full-time work. So that's the problem here.
And that's why it's considered wage theft. And look, this isn't the only company that's been accused of these sorts of practices. Our favorite company to pick on is McDonald's. And they, of course, face similar lawsuits on the basis that this computer system that they use encourages managers to manipulate worker time cards in order to keep their costs low while still squeezing more productivity out of their workers. Is that a surprise? No, not really. In fact, former McDonald's managers have described being told to manipulate workers' timesheets to avoid paying overtime. So, like I said, it wouldn't surprise me to see Jimmy John's and other fast food restaurants willing to do these same practices in order to basically pad their bottom lines, increase their profits. It really is kind of a sick thing that we have going on here. Just what happened to paying people for an honest day's work?
I mean, the thing is, at the end, first of all, I mean, I don't know how big Jimmy John's is. Is it quite a large established company? Is it kind of nationwide? Is it just in a few states and not like how big?
It's pretty large, actually.
Okay, fair enough.
There's a lot of Jimmy John's around. at least in my area. So
Can I just say,
say
I'm amazed how many different chains you guys have in the States. I mean, here I thought all your chains were international. There are so many chains you have there. I've never heard of these places ever. That's amazing. You boggle
Yeah,
my
you
mind,
realize
America.
that's part of America. We got choices. Choices on
And all of them
what
are
fast
terrible.
food place we want to make us
They're all
fat.
terrible choices, but you have choices.
Yeah.
exactly.
America.
But the thing is, at the end of the day with this story is that the workers, if they have worked, over the space of a month, 300 hours, then they need to get paid at least 300 hours worth of minimum wage pay per hour. If they haven't been paid that, then their wages have been stolen. Kind of then, if you then you've got to factor in and make it a bit more confusing in terms of how much overtime they've worked and so on and so forth. But if they've worked so many hours, they at least need to be paid minimum wage for those hours. And they're going to kind of, hopefully in the lawsuit, they look at kind of a case-by-case basis. And if they can prove it over a number of cases, honestly, I hope it costs the company a lot of money. And whilst I don't want the company to go out of business, because then that's obviously going to cost a lot of jobs and stuff, and that's devastating for a lot of places. But, I just hope that these people get the money that they deserve. They've worked hard for it. They deserve it.
The whole fucked up thing about this, too, is that a lot of these fast food places, I think it's common practice to try and load, as few people as possible to get as much done as possible. And it only makes sense, right? You pay fewer people less money to get more done. I mean, Americans are more productive than we've ever been, and yet we're also overworked. And now these places are literally stealing your wages for putting in all that extra productivity. It's just sick the kind of corporate culture we have now, where it's all about short-term profits and squeeze the worker for as much as possible. This is why places like Jimmy John's, which are actually very, very obviously anti-union and have cracked down on any sort of unionization attempts, that's why you need these unions. That's why you need people to get together and say, we're not going to take this anymore. We're going to band together and we're going to hold you accountable. We want to be equal here. We want to have an equal voice with your company and say that we're not going to work for any less than this. We're not going to take this wage theft anymore. We do deserve some rights. If there's no union, who's going to fight for you? And that's what I always say. They're not perfect. And there's umpteen problems with unions. But at the end of the day, who's going to fight for you? Who's going to fight against corporations that do this kind of thing? Nobody.